Hello world, this is a special video. I realized yesterday after I posted that video about radical Muslim violence that people were going to immediately turn that on its head and say, oh well, Christians have been just as bad in history. So I went looking and I found a great article that I highly encourage you to read. Go look for it and read. That explains the difference between Christian historical violence and radical Islam violence. This article, and I'm really not even going to provide my own interpretation because there's no interpretation necessary. This guy lays it out perfectly. So you can go find this article at meforum.org, which just stands for Middle Eastern Forum, and the article is Conflating History with Theology, Judeo-Christian Violence versus Islamic Violence. It's kind of a long article. I printed it out. It came out to about 5 pages. So, and some of it's very dry, but it's a really great article if you can get through it. So I just picked out some really good parts in it. First he says that the two examples that people usually come up with when they try to cite Christian violence is one where Yahweh told Moses, "But of the cities of these peoples which Yahweh your God gives you as an inheritance, you shall let nothing that breathes remain alive, but you shall utterly destroy them. The Hittite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Jebusite," lots of ites, "just as Yahweh your God has commanded you, lest they teach you to do according to all their abominations which they have done for their gods, and you sin against Yahweh your God." So Joshua, which was Moses' successor, conquered all the land, the mountain country and the south and the lowland and the wilderness slopes, and all their kings. He left none remaining, but utterly destroyed all that breathed, as Yahweh God of Israel had commanded. So right there, I mean, yeah, that's pretty violent. He just took over this whole Joshua. Joshua took his armies and just took over this massive amount of land and killed everyone in his path. So yeah, that's pretty brutally violent. Okay. And the second example revolves around the Crusader Wars waged by medieval European Christians. To be sure, the Crusades were a counterattack on Islam, not an unprovoked assault as is often depicted by revisionist history. A united Christendom sought to annex the Holy Land of Jerusalem, which prior to its conquest by Islam in the 7th century was an integral part of Christendom for nearly 400 years. He goes on. Moreover, Muslim invasions and atrocities against Christians were on the rise in the decades before the Crusades were launched in 1096. For example, in 1071, the Seljuk Turks had crushed the Byzantines in the pivotal Battle of Manzikert, and in effect annexed a major chunk of Byzantine Anatolia, opening the way for the eventual capture of Constantinople centuries later. A few decades earlier, the Fatimid Caliph al-Hakim desecrated and destroyed a number of important churches, such as the Church of St. Mark in Egypt and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, and decreed several even more oppressive than usual decrees against Christians and Jews. It is this backdrop that Pope Urban called for the Crusades. And this is from Pope Urban. "From the confines of Jerusalem and the city of Constantinople, a horrible tale has gone forth and very frequently has been brought to our ears, namely that a race from the kingdom of the Persians," which was just the Muslim Turks, "has invaded the land of those Christians and has depopulated them by the sword, pillage, and fire. It is led away a part to the captives into its own country, and a part it has destroyed by cruel tortures. It has either entirely destroyed the churches of God or appropriated them for the rights of its own religion." And so there he basically says, we just suffered a massive loss to our kingdom. We need to fight back. This is horrible. We were just brutally attacked. We got to fight back. So he goes on, a couple of paragraphs down. While such questions are popular, they reveal. In light of the above, one prime example of Hebraic violence from the Bible, the other from Christian history, why should Islam be the one religion always characterized as intrinsically violent, simply because its holy book and its history also contain violence? Why should non-Muslims always point to the Quran and ancient history as evidence of Islam's violence while never looking to their own scriptures and history? Next paragraph. While such questions are popular, they reveal a great deal of confusion between history and theology, between the temporal actions of men and what are understood to be the immutable words of God. The fundamental error being that Judeo-Christian history, which is violent, is being conflated with Islamic theology, which commands violence. There's a huge difference there. Of course, all religions have had their fair share of violence and intolerance toward the other. Whether this violence is ordained by God or whether warlike man merely wished it thus is the all-important question. Old Testament violence is an interesting case in point. Yahweh clearly ordered the Hebrews to annihilate the Canaanites and surrounding peoples. Such violence is therefore an expression of God's will, for good or ill. Regardless, all the historic violence committed by the Hebrews and recorded in the Old Testament is just that, history. It happened. God commanded it, but it revolved around a specific time and place, and was directed against a specific people. At no time did violence go on to become standardized or codified in Jewish law, which is what it has become in Islamic law, as he goes on to say. This is where Islamic violence is unique. Though similar to the violence of the Old Testament commanded by God and manifested in history, certain aspects of Islamic violence have become standardized in Islamic law, which is just Sharia, and apply at all times. Thus, while the violence found in the Quran is in fact historical, its ultimate significance is theological, or more specifically, doctrinal. Consider the following Quranic verses, better known as the sword verses. And I already quoted this in my last video, in my post, so you can just go back and read that part, but it does go on to mention a little bit more, and it goes on to a lot more detail than what I just posted. And it says, fight those who believe not in Allah, nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, which just means do not adhere to Islamic law, nor acknowledge the religion of truth, Islam, for the people of the book, Jews and Christians, until they pay tribute with willing submission and feel themselves utterly subdued. He goes on to say later, in fact, based on these sword verses, which is what those verses are called, the verses that command violence against any non-Muslim, Islam scholars, sheikhs, muftis, I guess, imams, qadis throughout the ages have all reached the consensus, binding on the entire Muslim community. So this is all around the world. This is not just Middle East stuff. This is everywhere that Muslims exist, or radical Muslims exist. I will be more clear to say radical Muslims exist, not all Muslims, just radicals. That Islam is to be at perpetual war with the non-Muslim world until the former subsumes the latter. It goes on for quite a few more pages and just keeps saying the same thing, how those sword verses condone and command, not just condone. I'm being too soft on these guys. It's not just condoning or encouraging, it's commanding violence against non-Muslims. It's saying if you meet somebody who does not believe in Islam and refuses to believe in Islam, kill them. Don't hold any mercy. So there you go. To anybody who thought that they could say, oh well, Christians have been just as bad. They might have been in history, but that's not how it is now. Old Testament violence, yes, very violent, and God did command it. Then Jesus came in the New Testament, everything changed. It's all different now. So there you go. Safety and peace, my friends.